Yeah, I'm almost wondering if I should do it without the camera. Any opinions?
Looks cool to me, but
It looks
whatever you
fine,
want.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really up to you, but it looks fine this way if you want to go for it this way.
All
Fernando
right,
says
we'll
keep
go ahead
it.
and,
So yeah.
okay.
So
So thank you everyone for joining. This is Power Up Your Fabric Development with DAX Studio and Tabular Editor. Second. So again, I'm Jason Romans. I'm a senior BI engineer. I rather have the title builder of models because that's the part of Power BI and analysis services that I love the most. I do have a blog that I blog under the Dax Shepherd. I will say that's something I need to work on this year is actually writing more content. If you look at my blog, it does, the good thing is it has all my contact info, links to things, to Sessionize, to GitHub, but a lot of the blog posts are about DocuSource or the blogging platform. And so I'm trying to get where I write more Power BI content. Hence the name the Dax Shepherd. So I live in Nashville, Tennessee with my wife. I started as a SQL Server DBA, and then I transitioned to the Microsoft BI stack. And that actually was one of those organic things where I made friends with the FP&A group, the Financial Planning and Analysis group, and found out that they had a failed Cognos project that never went to production, but some of those assets were left over. And again, I'm a DBA, so I'm the one who is kind of in charge of those assets. So we started taking that data and building analysis services tabular models. I came along right where is that choice of multidimensional or tabular. I'm glad I went tabular. So currently I still work on that full stack. So if I need to get data from NetSuite, I have to go build the integration services packages to do it. I'm hoping eventually that I really get to spend more time in Power BI. I'm also a Simple Talk author at Redgate, and I was made a community ambassador this year. And my favorite data model is TARDIS. The TARDIS. So in analysis services, I named the data model TARDIS after the show Doctor Who. And I tried to pick a name that was unique, that did not tie to a piece of the business, because a previous model was named after the labor software, was named after the ERP at the time, whereas TARDIS is very generic. But I love seeing emails, meeting requests, and things saying, need to discuss TARDIS, meeting about TARDIS, or we need to document TARDIS, or more info about TARDIS. So anyways, I thought that was funny. So I do want to point out that I would not be here if not for people that have taught me, people have shared their knowledge, people that have encouraged me to speak, to present. I just really want to acknowledge that there's people out there that have pulled us up, that basically we're standing on their shoulders. So our journey today is we will have an intro, and this is the famous navigation slide catered to Austin with a smoker. We will look at Performance Analyzer. We will look at DAX Studio. Lastly, Tabular Editor, and then we will conclude. So first thing I want you to know, and it really depends on your background, what you know, but Power BI is part of Fabric. So Fabric is not replacing Power BI. The skills that you've taken time to learn, they're not going away. If you have a Fabric capacity, it just enhances what you can do with Power BI. Because all of a sudden you get a OneLake, get a warehouse. They even have a default semantic model. And this may not be controversial to say, but I really think the semantic model in Power BI in Fabric is kind of forefront. It's being pushed forward, and eventually things like AI, just there's going to be more that uses that semantic model. So the more that you know about the semantic model, the more you're able to work with it. It just cannot hurt. It's only going to help your career. So what we cover today, to keep it as wide as possible, applies to Power BI Pro, Power BI Premium, and Fabric. So one of the things that kind of kicked off this presentation was seeing that the exam for Fabric DP600, implementing analytic solutions using Microsoft Fabric, had requirements around using tools like DAX Studio, Tabular Editor 2. For optimized enterprise scale semantic models, you see again improved DAX performance by using DAX Studio. Now, I will say I have not taken the certification. It's something that I think I should take and something I may make my goal for this year. So I'm not going off of what I've seen on a test, but just looking at the study guide for Microsoft and seeing what they want you to know. Another, optimize a semantic model by using Tabular Editor 2. I underline Tabular Editor 2 and kind of point that out because that is the free version. So they're not requiring you to buy a version of Tabular Editor. But why is my report slow? This really should be the motivating factor. So this is the part that, let's say you take the certification or you don't take certification, being able to tell why a report is slow, this is the thing that's going to have a lasting impact for years to come. It's going to enhance your Power BI developer skills and also your career development. Because if there's two people going for a job for Power BI developer, and you also know how to use DAX Studio, Tabular Editor, you know a little bit of how the semantic model works, how the engine underneath, I think you're going to have a better chance. So again, for the certification, it is probably more of a surface level understanding of the tools and what tools you would use for what reason. So I kind of started thinking about that and I'm like, well, it's kind of like Office 365. Office 365, you have a set of tasks that you want to do. You want to write a novel. Well, we all know you're going to probably use Word. Yes, there's some people that would still use Excel, but we're not going to talk about those people. You're going to do a budget. Okay, that's a good use for Excel. Got to write a term paper. Word. You're doing a profit and loss. Excel. This seems basic, and I know people are like, yeah, that's easy. Well, I look at the same way for the Power BI tools. You have these different tasks, these things that you may be asked about. Okay, you have a slow measure. Well, that's DAX Studio. Best practice analyzer. All right, that's for Tabular Editor. Test the DAX measure change. Back to DAX Studio. Automate adding measures in C#. Tabular Editor. And lastly, you have report timings that you need. That's going to be Performance Analyzer. So again, if you are doing the certification, I could see it being a fact of just knowing what tool is going to be good for what, and then at least understanding how to do it and knowing what we'll cover today. So now we're on to Performance Analyzer. So Performance Analyzer, it's not an external tool. It's built into Power BI Desktop. So Performance Analyzer is in the tab part of Power BI Desktop. And that is important to point out because some people, we will talk about DAX Studio and Tabular Editor, they may not even be able to install tools. or they may have to prove that there's a need to install those tools. Enter Performance Analyzer. So when we click on Performance Analyzer, we have some options. I can go ahead and start recording, and it will show the recording started. And then from there, I have a couple more options. I can refresh visuals. I can stop the Performance Analyzer, clear, export. So if I click refresh visuals, it is going to refresh every visual on the screen. And normally that's a good thing. I want to see all these visuals, what time are they taking? It also gives you an option once you've started recording that you can click on this little icon on the top of your visual to refresh just that visual. And we'll cover this later, but the values for other will be different if you just refresh that visual. Once you do that, you'll see a list of the visuals. So I did refresh visuals. Here's 3 of them. I have 2 cards and a table. I want to go ahead and drill down and see on those, okay, for card, table, I have these different numbers. I have a DAX query, visual display, and other. These are all in milliseconds. So I think if we had these as our visuals, we'd be happy that these are way under a second each. I can go and look at one card and say, okay, DAX query is, barely 3 milliseconds. Visual display is quick. Others got, 59 milliseconds. That's still excellent. So those 3 numbers that I mentioned, there's the visual display, there's other, and then there's the DAX query. So for visual display, this is the time actually spent producing that visual. If we had a restaurant, and I kind of came up with a restaurant analogy, if we had a restaurant, this would be the time plating the food. So one restaurant, they may just throw or slop the food on the plate and push it out. Another restaurant may sit there and put, okay, I'm going to put the steak here. I'm going to put this little thing here. I'm going to put some parsley here. So it'd take a lot longer to actually plate that food. So here's a slow visual that I created. And it's fun trying to create slow queries, slow visuals. This one, the way to really do it is just increase that granularity down to the day and then throw a ton of measures on it, and it's got to produce that visual. And we'll cover another way too. So the solutions are you can reduce the complexity of the visual. Did I really need that down to the day? Maybe I only need to see it by month. And I'm going to go back here real quick because honestly, is that chart even useful? Is that visual even useful? So another thing is you can use a background image if you have where you're doing different colors, you're actually doing the image for each one. You can do a background image that reduces the fact that Power BI has to draw that. In the resources at the end, and I will provide this slide deck, is a lot more resources, and there's links to this very issue and some of the solutions. Data Mozart, Nicola is excellent at this, has lots of resources on reducing that time to draw that visual. Now, other, that one's a little weird because it's like, okay, what is other? That seems like that covers everything. So other is the time waiting until the DAX query can be executed. In the restaurant analogy, this is like waiting to order. There may be 5 other tables out there. You know what you want to order, but you have to wait till all those tables have put in their order. until the server comes over and takes your order. So for solutions for this, you can reduce the number of visualizations on the page. If I move that visualization to a clean page, all of a sudden that other may drop to, so many milliseconds. This is the part where it gets a little tricky. It also could be you need to fix other bottlenecks first. Because if the first visual is taking forever, that may be the problem. It may not get to this visual till later. So again, it may be a bunch of combinations of factors. The first thing I like to do is copy it to a new page, rerun it. Like I mentioned earlier, you can also run the query itself just on that visual. And if other drops to almost nothing, it's one of those other visuals that it's waiting on. So the DAX query is our last number. Again, this one's 3 milliseconds. This is excellent. So this is just the time it takes to execute that DAX query. In the restaurant analogy, this is the time to actually prepare the food. So here's a slow DAX query. This one's almost up to 28 seconds. You can see the visual is 30 milliseconds, others 37. That is not the problem. It is that DAX query is taking 28 seconds to execute. So DAX query solutions, this is where you have to start investigating that query and finding out where most of that query time is spent. And then finding out, is there a way I can optimize this DAX code? Can I rewrite the DAX code? So while you're in there and you have this query, part of one of the options is you can run this query in query view, which is general availability. But I did point this out just because if you do have an older version, you're not allowed to install a new version. Up until May 2024, when it was announced as a preview, you had to go in to the options and enable it. So you can go enable it here. And as you can see from the screenshot, there are also query view with Copilot. So when I copy that to DAX query view, it opens it up and I can see not only the query, I can see the results. And it may look a little weird depending if you've ever seen this before, because this is everything needed to populate that visual. So it even has rows for the grand total and everything that it would need to actually populate that. It may even have 2 or 3 results that you'll have to go through. Kind of an exciting thing if you think about that this is now built into Power BI. And those queries are saved with the model. So you can use that to share or preserve that slow query. It's saved in that Power BI, PBIX, or whatever format you choose to save it in. Some people, this is going to be their first exposure to DAX queries. If they haven't installed DAX Studio, this may be where you start learning how to write DAX queries. Query view has many uses, including validating the data. John Kursky is big with this as far as using it, even automating and being able to tell, like, okay, this data passes this test using query view. I don't think it's good for diagnosing slow queries. It shows you the time it took to run, but that's about it. They've just announced DAX query view for the web. So this is in preview. And this is going to be good with models, semantic models that you already have in the cloud, that you already have in workspaces. So as you can tell, there's still going to be a need for running it in desktop. So let's go ahead and go for demo. And yes, I have excellent names of my files like Docker with slow visual. You probably can't guess what that one is. Go ahead and open desktop up. So the first thing I'm going to do is maybe I got a complaint of we have this report. We've been told that it's very slow and we need to fix it. So the first kind of tool I have is I can go to Optimize. I can go to Performance Analyzer, and it pulls up this tab over here. I'm going to go ahead and start recording. And then this is the part I said I have two choices. I can go ahead and just refresh that whole visual. So it's going to refresh everything on the page. And the funny thing is, I had to make things slow, but then not so slow for the demo. Otherwise, we'd just be sitting here for a minute while everything refreshed. So this is the one that maybe we've had complaints about, this one here. I can come in and look at these timings. So if I look, the DAX query isn't bad. It's really a good amount of visual display and then other. And what's neat, I can go ahead and clear it, run it again using the icon that's on the visual with the little magnifying glass. It ran quicker. I can see it's because the other dropped. So the main problem is the visual display is still, it's slow to actually generate this. The other is something I have to decide, is that something I'm going to fix? Is there one of these other visuals? If I copy this over, that other is going to be very low because I'm just refreshing this. And then while I'm at it, I have this query. I can copy it, run it in DAX Studio, run it elsewhere, or I can go ahead and run it in DAX Query View. And so here's that query that it took to create that visual. I can go ahead and run it. Like I said, this is everything that visual needs. So it actually has two results. So result 1 returns this number. And then result 2, kind of more what we're expecting. I do think this is amazing. And I think for people that want to come in here and start learning to interact with their data, to pull tables, even just to be able to say, hey, what's the row count of the sales table? What's the row count for this category? But to be able to do what it took you going out to DAX Studio is a cool feature.
Hey, Jason, just a quick question.
Yeah.
The result one that you were showing, is that the total? Is that what the result one is showing there?
I think because this one, it's an intersection count. And so I think it needs that because there's a couple other
Oh.
things in here that it actually needs for that visual. So like if we look at result 2, it also has the margin like this.
Oh, right.
So I
Okay.
think it's needed for that visual itself.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
Because if you do like a normal matrix, it doesn't have that. But this being the what is it? The line chart, or no? Hold on.
Column.
Yeah, I think it's line or bar line, maybe.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's what it needs for that visual. Any other questions? It
Don't
is
see
funny because I noticed that recently, and I'm like, oh, I should actually look and see how it uses that.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat either,
Okay.
Jason. So do you prefer people just kind of going off mute and asking questions or chats, or does it matter?
Whatever's best.
Okay. Okay.
All right, so performance analyzer, it really does like us make those informed decisions. And like I said, don't underestimate this tool, especially because it's built into Power BI. You can isolate where the issue is. And again, if I would have made the bad assumption that this was a DAX problem, that I had to optimize the DAX, then I would spend wasted time looking in the wrong place. So we talk a lot about DAX and we talk about learning DAX and how DAX is easy but hard. Sometimes this is how I feel about DAX. That you're like, please work, please work. Or you're like, I think I understand DAX. So I thought this was a little funny visual. So what about that slow query? So here's one that's almost 62 seconds. There is no way someone is going to wait around for this query to run and that visual to populate unless it saved the company tons of money. That is just too long to be waiting. So that's where we do have to turn to those external tools. When you download and install these external tools, and again, I have links in the resources, I recommend, if you're allowed to, if you can, if IT is going to do it, do a full install. Some of these tools do come with portable versions. So if you want to run them that way, or you're consulting and you have to go to a client's site, then you could use the portable versions. The nice thing about the full install in Power BI Desktop, it will put it as one of those icons in the external tools tab. And again, when you're starting out, you kind of need a little bit of extra help. It's okay, if I run it from Power BI Desktop, it's automatically going to connect to that semantic model, to that Power BI Desktop file for me. But once you're getting used to the tools, you can start, okay, I need to connect to this model in Premium. I want to connect to the desktop file myself. But it's nice in the beginning just to be able to click that button. So here in external tools and Power BI Desktop are those icons of things that I've installed. So if I click on one of those, it's going to connect back to this data model in this Power BI Desktop file. So what if that DAX query is slow? What do we do? That's where we turn to DAX Studio. So DAX Studio, this has been around a long time. For a lot of us that have used it, this is where we would actually create our measures, create our queries. As a DBA, I rely on SQL Server Management Studio almost every day still. DAX Studio to me is that management studio for DAX, for Power BI. I can connect to semantic models. And we talk about connecting to that Power BI desktop file that's on our machine. But what about the fact that I can connect to data models that are up in Power BI Premium or Fabric? That is kind of the big benefit. And the fact I can quickly kind of switch between them. For what we really need to know today, it would be that this is where you're going to do your performance tuning. Again, if your goal is maybe to take the certification, this is where you need to, okay, I need it for performance tuning. I need details of how that query is being processed. So I have this slow DAX query. I go ahead and copy that query. Even shows me it's copied. So now I'm going to go up to the external tools in my Power BI desktop, and I'm going to click on DAX Studio. This is DAX Studio. There is a lot to it. There's a lot of things that actually make your life easier. If you think about it, the kind of development over the last so many years has been, I need to develop around DAX. There are things that we do and don't even think about it, like the fact that there's a command to debug comment or debug commas, where it will put the commas at the beginning of the statement so then you can comment them out, so that you'll comment that whole line out. So it's just little things that kind of make your life as a developer and someone who has to work with DAX and Power BI and Fabric easier. So if I paste that query in, can see it. I also can see on the left what model I'm connected to, and then my list of tables. So let's go ahead and run this. And then here's the results. This one is different. This one did not come from that one visual, so it only has the one result. Again, it has rows and things for the totals. But kind of the real big can't do anywhere else type of options is under the traces part of the ribbon. So the first trace that you have is called all queries. This is like SQL Server Profiler. Whether or not you've moved on in SQL Server to extended events, we all still use SQL Server Profiler. We run it, and it allows us to capture everything that's happening on that SQL server. Just don't do it in production. So DAX Studio, same thing. I've connected, I'm running. It shows all the queries that are being executed against that semantic model. And it even shows the duration. So on this one, we can actually see that it's almost 32 seconds for that one. I will say this does have its value, especially if you're trying to see what's being executed against a semantic model. But in our case, I already have the query and I'm ready to run it. So one of the other options is query plan. Again, sounds like SQL Server. We have queries. So in DAX Studio, those query plans can show you the logical query plans and the physical. They look like this. To quote Patrick from Guy in the Cube, let the French toast. That is intense. With SQL Server, we have tools that allow us to visualize that query plan. So this is a lot, I think, to begin with, unless you're going to read like the Optimizing DAX book and really go head on with this. One of the things you can take away from this is looking at the number of records that are returned. But again, this does get a little complicated. And if you're really into performance tuning, then you're going to learn more about how to read a query plan. So this is the part that I spend the most time in. This is the part we're kind of getting to, is the server timings. So we have to kind of acknowledge in Power BI, there's two engines. There's the formula engine and the storage engine. The formula engine is kind of the conductor. It does not cache the data. It's single threaded. And it's able to do complex operations. So one thing I want to point out and kind of stop here for a second is we're talking about the storage engine, but we're not referring to import mode and loading the data when processing the model. And that would involve, okay, does this query fold? Does it not fold when I'm pulling the data from the source? So we're talking about the data that went through the process of pulling from the source, of whether or not it folded, query folding, but it has been loaded to the VertiPack engine. It has been stored. Now we're querying, we're accessing that data. And you don't realize it, but every time you click on a visual, every time you filter, you're accessing that data that's been loaded in there. So I just want to point that out because I know that gets confusing and some people think, oh, I've heard about this. We're talking about query folding and, I'm going to refresh every hour, every day. We're talking about after that's happened and you've stored the data, if we're talking about import VertiPack mode. So the storage engine, this is where we want most of that time to be spent. It has the ability to cache. It has the ability to run multi-threaded operations. And then the type of operations that it can do depends on the storage engine we're talking about. So VertiPack, that import mode is very limited. So one thing I want to point out is we will go in just a little bit about the different storage modes, but we really can't cover optimizing or looking at, okay, what about direct query? What about this? What about that? And we will cover a little, but that's going beyond the scope of this presentation. So the storage engine, there are different ones. So the one that you really should be using for all cases until you find one that does not work is import mode, the VertiPack. I am pulling all that data. I am letting Power BI store it for me for quick retrieval. The other one is direct query SQL. So I'm connecting to SQL Server or Snowflake every time I click on a visual. Every time it needs to go to that storage engine, it's sent out to get that data. And there may be a combination of these. So you have import, but you're also using direct query SQL. You have direct query over another tabular model. So once you get more than just import mode, the VertiPack, you're increasing that complexity. So for example, I've seen a model where the date table is the only thing in import, and then the rest of the model is in direct query. So now you're going to have to figure out, is that optimal? What if you put the date table in direct query also? Obviously, moving all of it to import, there was probably a reason done to why that's not able to be done. I just want the main point to be, if you have it in VertiPack, if you imported, that is going to be quote unquote the easiest way to performance tune and look at performance. As soon as you kind of take those rails off and start doing mixed modes and doing direct query, it's going to make your job more complicated. And you're going to have to be the one or whoever to actually performance test those different scenarios. So VertiPack, it needs the formula engine for something as simple as an if statement. SQL Server, it can push that if equivalent to SQL Server. Now, this is not an argument to use direct query. Remember, VertiPack is very limited in what it can do, but that's why it has the formula engine. And then VertiPack, as we'll see, it's optimized for that data retrieval. So VertiPack is special. It's not row-based like your typical installed SQL Server. It's column-based. It's encoded. It's compressed. So it's made to get that data in small as it can be in memory and for quick retrieval. So VertiPack in the restaurant analogy, to me, it would be a local storeroom that is efficiently organized for quick retrieval. Whereas direct query, it's basically there's a supplier that brings what I request as needed. Every time I need something, that supplier is going to bring it. Now, maybe that supplier does offer some pre-made things, some things that are already created that I can just use. But one, is there a cost? Going to the SQL Server or Snowflake example, that may be a cost every time I'm running a query. Also, the distance for it to go get that and bring back what I need. So one thing in DAX Studio is the fact that, like we mentioned, the storage engine can cache. So if you keep running the same query, it will cache that data, and then it only really has to do the formula engine part. So we have a choice to clear the cache on demand or clear it on run. So the location of the query and server timings, once we've enabled them, they're basically right under the query near where we'd run or see the results. And it just depends which one you have enabled. You could have both of them so you can switch back and forth. So the easiest DAX to run as a query is just evaluate and then a table name. So evaluate product will return the whole product table. So I ran this, and there's kind of a lot here. So over here, we have our timings. And we'll go over each piece of this. And then we kind of have the query that ran. There was only one. And then over to the right is the storage engine query, easier to see. This model is in VertiPack. This is import mode. So it has what looks like SQL, and they call it XM SQL. It really, from what they've said, it really is not running XM SQL. There's not something that you can run, but this is a representation, human readable, of what basically that logic would be. So this is for our benefit. Behind the scenes, remember, it's storing everything in columns separately. So how it actually returns this is a little bit more of a mystery. But if you look at the top, I've highlighted the row number. By default, if it doesn't put the row number, it's going to try to aggregate the results. So by introducing a row number, it means give me the whole table, do not aggregate it. So what's neat about DAX Studio is the server timings, you can actually see the formula engine and the storage engine working together and kind of this handoff. So this one, this query I've ran, it has 4 queries, mainly in the formula engine. Blue shows where the storage engine is in the timeline. So that's kind of where it comes into play. It goes and gets something, and then it's back to the formula engine. Storage engine gets something, then back to the formula engine. Whereas this one, it's 33.3% in the formula engine, and then blue shows where the storage engine is. So obviously the storage engine, it's a lot longer times that it's taking to run those. I will say, and again, have not taken the certification. I don't think for that you would have to go this in depth. It's more about knowing what tool does what, and even the capabilities, the fact that you can start to see this. But again, our goal is if this is where you're going to spend your time or this is where your passion is performance tuning and looking at queries, then these tools are really going to advance that.
Hey,
So
Jason,
server, yes.
I'm sorry. There's a question in the chat. I don't know if now's a good time to ask,
Okay.
or if you want to finish the. So it's from Joe. Basically, the question is, new to Power BI, how do you link DAX Studio from an external data source? And Joe, I don't know if you want to
Meaning a
expand on that.
semantic,
Yeah.
meaning a semantic model in the service.
Taking my question, I'm not. I was trying to figure out where the DAX Studio sits. Is it external source? I wasn't sure.
Are you able to hear Jason? I know. Is it?
It's
Audible for
really
you?
low, but I think it's where it fits in.
I mean,
Go
if
to
I
Power BI.
platform, could I find DAX Studio? I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. That's something that I have to search for, that built in, or is that something external that I have to load? And
Yeah, Joe, it's really hard to hear you. I don't know if maybe it's your headset or if you're not maybe close enough to the speaker that you're speaking on, but we can't really hear what you're saying very
If
well.
I heard correctly, I'm almost sure it's the fact, how do you get DAX Studio? If that's the question, then there is the resources that in the end have a link, but it is something you download. It's
Okay.
one of the external tools that can be downloaded and installed separately.
Got it. Yeah, that's the question is where do you find DAX Studio? Yep.
Okay. It is in the resources in this slide deck, and I can provide the slide deck. And then
Perfect.
same thing with Tabular. I link each of the tools and where to find them. Plus there's more information.
Yep. I'll drop links to those in the chat too.
Okay. So the server timings, this is kind of where the value would come in. If you're really looking to figure out how to make this faster and where it's spending its time. So we have the total time that this query took to run. Again, 180 milliseconds is excellent. We have what they call the storage engine CPU, so how long that took to run. And that number really depends because here it actually, instead of just being single threaded, it actually went parallel 1.7. So if we can have our storage engine go parallel 20 times, that is going to speed up that retrieval of that data from the storage engine. We have the time that it took in the formula engine in yellow, the time for the storage engine in blue, and then you get this nice little timeline bar. So really quickly, I can see the formula engine kind of started this, and then most of the time from that point on was spent in the storage engine. We also get to see how many storage engine queries it took, and then whether or not it was able to use the storage engine cache. Again, for DAX Studio, this also depends whether or not I'm clearing that cache. So one of the simple ways in DAX to increase the query time is to filter by the full table in a calculate instead of by the column. And we'll actually revisit this, but this pattern is one that I can apply to get slow queries or get queries that have a lot of storage engine queries. So DAX Studio, the actual time is 85 seconds, so that is not good. But also the fact that it took almost 2,576 queries sent to the storage engine to answer this question. So this is good. It only had 2 storage engine queries, 180 milliseconds. This would be excellent. So this one is heavily formula engine, which, I mean, if the total time was fast, that may not matter. But remember, that formula engine is very slow. It's single threaded. So if we can get as much as possible to the storage engine, then we can take advantage of the storage engine's capability, especially when we're talking import. So the ways to invoke the formula engine, just for number wise, I'm not saying don't use these patterns. I'm just saying if we want to see the formula engine come alive, use if statements, use concatenate. Things that are in DAX that the storage engine doesn't know how to do. Again, though, it's not bad. It's the storage engine does what it does it quickly, it returns it to the formula engine, let it do the complicated things. One thing you may see, and I just want to point this out, if you see something called the callback data ID, this is a way for the formula engine and storage engine to work together. So the storage engine can do its piece and then call the formula engine and be like, hey, got this data, and work together. So it's really just letting you know that the formula engine and storage engine are kind of working together. So I do want to point out, even though that really wasn't in the scope, for a direct query model, so every time we're doing a visual, every time we're doing a measure, every time we're looking at a visual, it's going out to the direct query SQL server, the Snowflake database. So for direct query, how many queries are being sent to that source? We can actually use DAX Studio and see, oh, okay, for this measure, I'm sending 500 queries to the source. That may actually have a cost with it. And remember, this isn't on refresh. This is every time you're doing a filter, every time you're refreshing those visuals. Actually, I have Power BI already open, so let me open that back up. So DAX Studio has already been installed. I'm going to go ahead and open it up here. And it will make that connection to that Power BI desktop that's running on my machine. So if I go back really quick to, let's say I want to do this visual. Actually, let's go here. Okay. So if I refresh this one, I have this query. This DAX query is not that slow, but I didn't want to make it too slow to take time. So I'm going to copy that query. I've already opened DAX Studio. I'm going to go ahead and paste it into DAX Studio. I'm going to go ahead and run this. There's my results. Now, one thing, if I keep running this, it actually will be faster because it's probably going to hit that cache each time. So we saw that it hit the cache. So if I really want to do this without anything in the cache, I'm going to go ahead and click this button to clear on run and run it again. If we notice, one of the things is we have 120 queries for this. It took about 4 seconds. Good thing is most of the time was spent in the storage engine, but the problem is I have 120 queries. And if I go click on them, it seems like a lot has to do with different dates that it's pushing. So DAX Studio, like I said, you can do a lot of things in DAX Studio. You can kind of live in your query. One of the things you can do is you can come here and say, okay, I have this total big orders bad. I know that's an excellent name, but I'm going to go here and click define measure. It will actually show this measure and the code for it in here. And so if I run it, it's going to run the same because this measure, I haven't changed it. But it's going to allow me to change a measure that may be separate from what's in the model. Maybe I don't even have access to change measures in the model. I can come in here, change this measure locally, and start testing it. So let me say I read one of the SQL BI blogs and I knew if I had to keep filters here, that's going to speed things up. If I come in here and say, okay, I saw this on a blog, I'm going to try it, and I run this. All of a sudden, not only is the query faster, down to 151 milliseconds, we only have one storage engine query. So I've actually made an improvement in this measure locally. Now, if we decide, hey, this is something we want, this is how it should work, we've looked at everything, then this measure could be changed in the actual semantic model. You also can come in here and have multiple measures. You can test. There is so much you can do at DAX Studio. So what about taking proactive measures? How do we find issues ahead of time? Because again, waiting till someone says this report is slow, or waiting until you have developers that are seeing columns that they shouldn't be seeing is not really the best way to do this. So that's where Tabular Editor comes in. So Tabular Editor, again, I've been using this for a long time, especially coming from analysis services. This is the way I started building my models after a certain point. So I didn't have to open Visual Studio. I didn't have to have Visual Studio crash on me. This was how I would build my models. So that's the main use. That's one of the reasons it was developed. It allows me to make change, but it also allows me to audit a model. And that's where Best Practice Analyzer comes in. Again, it's underlined because there's a lot of things you can do with Tabular Editor, but if we're looking at kind of knowing one of the things around the certification, knowing Best Practice Analyzer is not going to hurt. So Tabular Editor 2.x is the free version. It's the version listed in the certification. 3.x is the paid version. All I'll say is it does have extra features. It's something if you can get your company to pay for it, it's worth it. It does have a DAX debugger. And then where I've really been using it lately is to script out DAX. So I need to move these measures from one model to another. I can script out that DAX. So Tabular Editor 2. If I see anything about optimizing the model, Tabular Editor 2, it's going to be the Best Practice Analyzer. So Tabular Editor 2 is not the best for kind of scaling and everything as far as the UI. So some of the screenshots are a little kind of, blown up. But so if we go up to Tools, we have Best Practice Analyzer and manage those Best Practice Analyzer rules. So I can also add and manage those rules. And it does it just like a lot of programs where it's the current model, the local user, the local machine, depending on where I have rights to install those rules, or if we're using those rules for everyone on that computer. So the nice thing is, Tabular Editor also has C# scripting. I can take this that came from Michael Kowalski or from the Tabular Editor website. I can take this script, run it in Tabular Editor. It will download the rules from Microsoft's GitHub for me, and I don't even have to download it and place it in the location. Now that makes some people nervous. So I'm not running a script, not going to do it, especially not to download rules I don't know about. So there's alternative methods. You can download those from Microsoft, the GitHub. Again, I'll have the link in the resources, and it's here for the Microsoft version. It also has other languages besides English. So even if I am going to use the C# script method, I can go in and change, okay, I wanted to download Italian and download those rules. So what's nice is the best practice analyzer right away when you connect to a model at the bottom will show you how many issues it found with the rule set that you have loaded. So here's an example of the rule set that it's using. And it also gives them categories, type, severity. You can come in here and manage those rules. And it may be that you download the rule file, but maybe you parse it down and say, look, we're going to try this out as a company. We're only going to use these 3 rules to begin with, or these 5 rules. And you can cater that rule file to what your company or what your needs are. You may not agree that some of these are even rule violations. So what about that slow pattern I showed earlier? That one that allowed me to get that DAX query that took a really long time, and that pattern that allowed it to have 500 storage engine queries. Well, that pattern was I was filtering by the whole table. This is very, very common. The way we learn DAX, we start out with using filter and we're used to filtering a table. The problem comes when we start using calculate and those filters were filtering by the whole table instead of the column. But what if I didn't know that? Well, one of the rules that Best Practice Analyzer will detect is that very thing. And it's like, okay, fine, it detected it. But what's really neat is if you actually go and edit that rule and look at it, it's got a description. It's got either a reference or multiple references to URLs where you can read more about that rule and options of how you could fix it. Now, that's not the case for every one of these. It really depends on what the issue is and how it would be fixed. All these rules are, for the most part, is they're just using regular expression to kind of match a pattern, and that's how they're able to detect. So this is kind of a blown up of what that screenshot shown. This is what's in there, the description with the help link. This one actually has 2 references, one to Microsoft's and one to the SQL BI article. I found this other one, and I think this may have been on one of the other best practice analyzers, that this one goes to Michael Kowalski's blog, Elegant BI, and he covers this in his top 10 best practices. And on that link, and again, I'll provide this, he actually goes through, and so does SQL BI. They show you, okay, if you do this one, this is what's going to happen. If you do option 2, this is what's going to happen. I think a lot of us end up with option 2 because we actually want to keep those filters and just apply more filters. So that description, you can edit it. you could have a link to your company's best practices, a link to SharePoint for more information. And just so everyone knows, we're kind of getting close to landing this plane. I wish I had a smoker analogy, maybe where the brisket's getting ready to be done. So again, I'm in Power BI Desktop. I've already installed Tabular Editor. I go to my external tools because I want to connect to this data model. I don't want to connect to one up in Premium. It's now open. Again, right away, I see that this model I'm connecting to has 122 best practice issues based on the rule file I am currently using. Again, kind of the UI and stuff, it is very small, but I can see my model, my listed tables. I can expand things out, relationships. Again, there's so much you can do with Tabular Editor. But right now, we care about Best Practice Analyzer. So I can go and actually look at what those rule violations are or the rule alerts and even collapse them and say, okay, here's that one that I keep bringing up, filter column values with proper syntax. So I have this one measure that has that issue. On some things, you're actually able to right click and generate a fix script. So for this, it has to do with the data types. That's something that they can script out. I can apply the fix, but I want to copy that fix, come in here and see what it is. If nothing else, this may even be a learning time to say, oh, okay, that's what it is. It's just going to take the data type of this column and change it. There's also, and I put the links in the resources, there is a lot of C# scripts out there that will automate different things for you. So to manage the BPA rules, this is where I can come and say, okay, I don't have any rules for this current model, but I did load one for the local user, and that's what that script did. Again, the resources has more info on if you want to load it to local machine or local user. It really depends where you put that rule file. So in respect to time, go ahead and move on. So in conclusion, so if you have a slow report, you're always going to start in Power BI Desktop and start with that performance analyzer. That way you can actually find out, okay, is it this visual? Is it the DAX query? What is going on? Then normally, and again, it really does depend on what you find out, then you may actually move on to DAX Studio because it's time to look at that flow query. Can I change the DAX code? But really for prevention, that's where you're going to go with Tabular Editor and the Best Practice Analyzer. You can take and run that against different models. Like if you have models up in Power BI Service, up in Premium. And the reason why I keep saying Premium, for any external tool, you're going to need an XMLA endpoint to connect to. So if you're using Power BI Desktop, that's not an issue. Direct connect. If you're connecting up to the service, then you're actually going to need that endpoint and that endpoint turned on by the administrator of that tenant. And so you'll at least need read access. But you can connect and actually say, oh, okay, this model has this many issues. Oh, this one has this many issues. As much as I keep doing things around external tools and different sessions and presentations, it's it's just a reminder that once you invest in these tools, it's worth it, because what is out there is just going to need these tools more and more. Fabric is just another opportunity for you to invest in yourself and actually use that in Fabric. Again, when it comes time to whether it's going for a new job and just having those skills and being next to someone who may not have invested that time and only knows just Power BI desktop, it enhances you. And even if we're not going for a job, maybe to be able to show your coworkers, to show them, hey, I can save you time. I know you're going through and manually doing all those measures. Let me give you back your day so you can invest in learning. Again, I really do like the external tools. I know I'm kind of a fanboy for them. So, and there's only so much that Power BI Desktop can do. And sometimes, like with Tabular Editor, it was able to do calculation groups probably 2 years before desktop could. So again, these are the resources I talked about, and I will put this slide deck on my GitHub. I'll provide it wherever needed. Also, I didn't point this out, but my email, my contact infos will be the very last slide. If you can't find anything I didn't answer, email me. So I did put this on here because I did use that smoker icon from a flat icon site. And then were there any questions?
Just a comment from me, Jason. This was awesome. It was such a great presentation on kind of deep diving on these tools. So just, I don't have a question, just some high praise for you to go through the presentation with us. Really, really good job.
Thank you. I can't tell if I'm blocking the QR code or
But with that, are there other questions that anybody has? Feel free to come off mute or post in the chat.
the
I
one
don't see
thing
any in
I'll
the
say
chat, but
really. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. No, go
Oh,
ahead.
the thing I was gonna say really quick again is if you're looking at certification, if you're looking, just to get an overview of these tools, that really is kind of that knowing what each tool does. We went beyond that in some points, and then you start talking about direct query there. I mean, it's another thing that shows you how many opportunities this space offers us.
Endless opportunities.